in the future, they're going to look to kill us. Those that are not willing to preach the same stuff that they have written in their 28 fundamental doctrines. It's going to be worse from those inside than it will be from those outside. We're told that. It's a prophecy. I was explaining yesterday to a group of 5 people that have been staying the weekend with us here that COVID has been a real blessing to me, the whole pandemic, because during that time I was studying an average of 5 messages per week for 2 years. And it was most of the time that I was able to share, it just was incredible, like to be able to study that much out of necessity, not just because you're interested and sometimes you don't. No, you have to study, or else you're going to, show yourself unprepared, and I don't want to be unprepared for the Lord. So that's been a real blessing. I think if I could look back on the pandemic, that's what it was for me. It was a time of real study. And so thank you for coming. Anyways, I'm looking forward to being able to go into John chapter 7 today. Right when Jesus had been done preaching in the sanctuary, in the synagogue, it says, after these things, which was that sermon that was so divisive in chapter 6, after these things, Jesus did walk in Galilee. Why? Because he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. Now, remember, Jesus had been saying that you need to eat the flesh that is mine, and you need to drink the blood that is mine. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I mean, they're murmuring amongst themselves, and Jesus, instead of, preparing the ground a little bit so that he could further on with his sermon and people weren't as, distracted or whatever, he actually went deeper and stronger into that message by saying, listen, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. And then later he explained, but it was at that point many of the disciples walked no more with him. And so Jesus, after that sermon, and after healing the guy in chapter 5 on the Sabbath day, man, I'll tell you, the Jews were really upset. This guy not only breaks the Sabbath, he's teaching contrary to the law of Moses. That's what they were believing. So Jesus wasn't walking in Jewry anymore, because what was happening is the Jews thought this man was a complete heretic. They thought he broke the Sabbath. Well, he didn't. He didn't ever break the Sabbath. He just didn't do it the way they thought he should. And, do you feel like there's times in your life where you are doing something or believing something that is different than others, but you believe that God is leading you that way? Well, if you felt that way, you're feeling the same way that Jesus felt. And I have felt that way too. I don't mind so much, except when it's a close friend. That hurts. And somebody who I feel, man, I wish we could connect. I wish we could be together. That hurts. But Jesus was feeling that way. I mean, he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I mean, think about your family or your friends. You want to share with them. You want to teach them. You want them to be educated the same way that you've been, because you've had that opportunity to see. Your eyes have been opened. You've been gifted with the eye salve, and it's clear. You can explain it. It's right there in black and white. And that's what the truth is. You're sure of it. You're as sure of this thing than you are that the seventh day is the Sabbath, or that Jesus is coming in the clouds of heaven, or that, I don't know your background, but you've got something that you're excited about, and you know it's true. Well, Jesus knew what he was saying was true. He was sure of it. But he wouldn't walk in those areas anymore because they were trying to kill him. Well, that's not a good place to be. That doesn't feel good. It doesn't make you feel socially connected or fulfilled. Well, that kind of happened in the sermon that he just was finishing preaching, right? There was a whole group that was upset, and he lost a bunch of people. Now he won't walk in the area where he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so Jesus is going through all this right now, and you probably have been through that as well. They were seeking to kill him, and they're not seeking to kill us in North America right now, or in some of the other places represented by those that are here today, but they will. This is a real thing. One day they're going to seek to kill us, and it won't just be those Catholics and those Jesuits and those others. It's going to be the Jews. Okay, now, the Jews to me represents the spiritual church that God had called to be his people at that time. Now, whether they are Jewish in blood or not, I'll let you decide whether that you believe that's true. And sure, I accept that. It could be very true. But for me, the Jews represent the people that God had called at that very time. And today, I would think that the Jews that God has called at this very time are the Seventh-day Adventists. And I believe that God has raised up that church for the purpose of telling the truth all the way around the world. And that's why in the 1840s, God did raise up that church. But then what happened is that church was blindsided by some of the unwillingness to receive the messages that were given by God through his messengers, which at the time was A.T. Jones and Wagner. And then there was a lot of like, no, don't listen to them because, and you need to listen to me because, and I'm right because. And there was a whole lot of that going on in the 1880s. And then there was this movement by the church to cause Ellen White in the early 1890s to go to Australia. Well, man, that was a big bummer. The church didn't even want the prophetess to be around, right? So the church is going into darkness, you can see, from rejecting the 1888 message, sending the prophet away. No wonder they're so confused about the book, The Desire of Ages. At that point, they were already going the wrong direction, not wanting God's prophet, and then this book comes out with some wording that could be understood incorrectly, and the church went south after that. You go into the whole crisis of Kellogg with a different spirit that comes in, which is now called in the church the third person of the Godhead, because Desire of Ages says it, and then it goes on through into this whole, the Trinity word is accepted in the 1913 Review and Herald, and Ellen White dies in 1915, the 1919 Bible conferences, the secret ones, where, you know, the president says, okay, stop recording as a secretary. And so the president has said, stop recording, period. And there's nothing more learned about what's going on. And then there's the publication of the studies that Leroy Froom put together in 1928 with the coming of the Comforter, and that led into the 1950s, and that led into the 1970s, the late 1970s. With the 50s was the publication of the Questions on Doctrine and the whole Martin conundrum that was going on there. And then you have the situation with Ford in Australia in the 1970s, which threw the church into a tailspin. That was a big to-do at that time. And then in 1980, right after the end of that, when nobody was really focusing on the Trinity, bring the Trinity right in 1980. And since then, it's a completely different God, and the whole thing's gone south. So today, the Jews are those that God had called that have gone south. Whereas back then, it was the Israelites that God had called that had gone south. And so to me, that makes a lot of sense, where in the future, they're going to look to kill us. Those that are not willing to preach the same stuff that they have written in their 28 fundamental doctrines. It's going to be worse from those inside than it will be from those outside. We're told that. It's a prophecy. And you can look at it in Micah if you'd like, but also in the writings of Sister White. So, for he would not walk in Jewry because the Jews sought to kill him. Now, at that time that he was not walking in Jewry, but he was in Galilee, there was the Feast of the Jews. It was the Feast of the Tabernacles that was nigh at hand. And his brothers, you know, the sons of Joseph, they said at that time, like, well, hey, why don't you go, depart from here, and go to Judea, you know, the land of Jewry. Go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you do. Like, come on, don't you want to show yourself to those that are interested in what you're doing? Obviously, Jesus hadn't been going to the festivals, and you can read that actually for a short time in Desire of Ages, page 450.1. As the sons of Joseph made preparation to attend the Feast of Tabernacles, they saw that Christ made no movement, signifying his intention of attending. They watched him with anxiety, like, well, come on, aren't you going to go to the festivals? Well, since the healing at Bethesda, which is in chapter 5 of the book of John, he had not attended the national gatherings. Whoa! So since chapter 5, he had not attended the national gatherings. So if you went to chapter 5 and you saw which was the festival that was mentioned, which is the Feast of the Jews, whichever one this was, I don't recall off the top of my head, but in between here and 2 chapters later, after he had preached this really divisive sermon in chapter 6, then you get to chapter 7, and he hasn't been going according to the desire of ages. He had not attended the national gatherings. Now, to avoid useless conflict with the leaders at Jerusalem, he had restricted his labors to Galilee. And that's something to learn. There are times with the leaders that are at Jerusalem, there are times when we can have useless conflict, okay? There are times where it's just not better to be with them. It's better, in fact, to just be separated. And he had restricted his labors in Galilee for that purpose. His apparent neglect of the religious assemblies and the enmity manifested toward him by the priests and rabbis was a cause of perplexity to the people about him, and even to his own disciples and his kindred. And so I'm going to let you read the rest of that for yourselves, but that's on page 450.1. And I just find it interesting that Jesus was walking in Galilee here, not walking in Jewry, and the reason why is the Jews sought to kill him. Now, where did we learn that the Jews sought to kill him? Well, I'm going to show you. It's in John chapter 5, verse 18. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he had not only broken the Sabbath, but he also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. Now, remember, we had talked about that he did not break the Sabbath, and it was because of the misunderstanding of the Jews that they thought he broke the Sabbath. And he did not make himself equal with God the way that they thought he was making himself equal with God. They were wrong on this point. They were wrong on this point. We use this text a lot to show that, Jesus being the Son is now equal with God. Well, we need to be careful the way we use this text, because this text is showing the inconsistency of the truth with the Jewish thinking. And so just be careful with this text, but you can use it that way. Just know that it's not used that way on purpose. It's actually used to show that the Jews were wrong. But here in chapter 5, verse 18, the Jews were seeking to kill him. And so Jesus wasn't traveling since chapter 5 in the Desire of Ages in Jewry because the Jews were seeking to kill him. So now it makes better sense in my mind why she said what she did in the Desire of Ages is because it makes perfect, contextual sense. If you take chapter 7 and chapter 5 and compare the two, you're like, oh, it's perfect. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry because they sought to kill him. And that was, of course, because he was trying to show them how to keep God's law. And they were trying to not keep God's law. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles is at hand. His brethren therefore said unto him, Depart from here, and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you do. For there is no man that does anything in secret, and he himself seeks to be known openly. So they're actually saying this in a snarky way. The brethren, which are the sons of Joseph, they were treating Christ as though he was contradictory in his lifestyle. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Don't just stay here in Galilee. I mean, what's your problem? You're really believing that you're going to reach the world by staying here in Galilee? Really? And so his brethren did not believe in him. Okay? So that's really what verse 5 is saying. And Jesus goes on and says something interesting. My time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. So God has a plan for me in my life. I'm actually a student of prophecy. I believe it applies to me, and my time is not yet come. Your time, not a believer in the Spirit of truth that God had sent in his Son, your time is always ready. So I think that's quite an interesting comment there. Christ knew that he had a specific plan. Jesus was going to be fitting into the time frame that God had for him based on prophecy. So Vern, go ahead and share if you'd like to.
Yeah, we discussed this matter at length yesterday in our study, our Sabbath afternoon study. The thing here is when my time is not yet at hand, Christ knew the timeline. He knew it perfectly. And the part we were discussing was with the beginning of all this in chapter 1. Both he and John had a time, their 30th birthday, to be called master, to be involved in the priesthood. They had to be 30 years of age. The whole nation, we're told in Spirit of Prophecy, page 135, the Desire of Ages, tells us that at that point in time, when John came forth, that the leadership, the Sanhedrin, were watching carefully because some of them remembered the 30 years prior when Zechariah had spoken of John's purpose. And this is why they came to him specifically, asked him, are you the Christ? And they didn't get to ask that question. Immediately before they said, who are you? He said, I'm not the Christ. He knew what they were asking.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, then are you Elijah? Well, no, I'm not. These things were because they were watching. They knew the time and the hour. This was their condemnation, and they didn't want to accept. And he was of the priesthood, unlike Christ. He was of the Levitical order. His father was of the service order. Yeah. And so they were expecting and had to accept. If he said he was, they would have looked to him as Messiah. But he said, no, I'm not. And so this timing, not only was the timing of Daniel right, but both these individuals, both Christ and John, were both in their 30th year. They both entered the time of priesthood, just like we saw in Ezekiel with him. It was in the 5th month of his 30th year that the visions of the Lord came to him. The Lord's timings are perfect, and he doesn't vary from those. So that was the point I would.
You have brought that up before, and I had forgotten about that, and I like how John and Jesus there in John chapter 1 were both in their 30th year coming into ministry. And yeah, very interesting. Good, thank you. My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because here's why the world hates Jesus Christ. I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil. And remember in John chapter 3, it makes it clear that nobody comes to the light that doesn't want truth, because their deeds would be exposed. And that's hard sometimes. I mean, think about it. Sometimes you're in the spotlight, you've done what's wrong, and people are talking about what you've done that's wrong. That's not a fun thing. That's not enjoyable. And especially if the enemy is really hammering down on you and chewing on you like, you're this evil being, this evil, person that's claiming to be a Christian. The world doesn't want that. Well, the blessing comes from enduring those things. You're standing in the sight of a holy God, and you know you're guilty. You know you desire punishment. You know you've done what's wrong. But God in His mercy says, confess, forsake those things. I will cleanse you. I'm just and willing to cleanse you and to take all that unrighteousness away. And then you're standing there before a holy God as though you've never sinned. You're justified. And it's such an overwhelming blessing in somebody's life to go through that experience. So when you come to the light, the world doesn't want to, but those that actually do come to the light are considered Christians because their deeds have been exposed, and they're able to get away from those deeds that are, embarrassing to be exposed. And so you have that blessing there that's being referred to in John chapter 3, and it's really what's being talked about here in John chapter 7. I testify of this world. I testify of it that their works are evil, and they don't want to come to me as a result. So we're going to just read one more verse here. Go ye up unto the feast. You guys go ahead. Go on without me. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet full come. So Jesus actually instructed others to go to the festivals. He did not yet. You're going to read that about halfway through is when he exposed himself, halfway through the feast, and that's when he stood in the temple a little bit later. But Christ's time frame, he knew. He knew it based on his age, as was mentioned, but also the prophecies of the book of Daniel. He knew that he was going to be, in the midst of the week, the sacrifice that would cause the oblations to cease. And he realized that God was preparing for his son to be fulfilling those prophecies. So he knew this, he understood. He realized since he was 12 years old that sacrifice referred to him or symbolized himself. And those things you can read in the Desire of Ages as well, when he was 12 years old in the book of Luke. So anyways, I just think that today has been a wonderful time of discussion, and I look forward to continuing these kind of discussions with you all. We're going to continue looking in John next time we're together, but what we want is we want to know that we have a purpose. We have a time frame. God is looking for his people. As was mentioned, I do believe that God will send his Son at the appointed time. Now, it would be the Feast of Tabernacles likely, because that's where we're taken to heaven, and that's where the Tabernacles is fulfilled. You can read about that in Revelation chapter 21, and that's at the end of the 1,000 years where the tabernacle of God will come and dwell with his people. That word dwell is actually similar to the tabernacle word in skene and skenu. And so what you have is God tabernacling with his people throughout eternity. And so I think that will probably begin at the coming of Christ. But the whole purpose is that before that coming, before the tabernacle is actually begun and then later fulfilled, he wants to raise up a people. And that people, I believe, I'm looking at. That people are those that are interested to study the Bible, the ones that are truly seeking. They're looking for what saith the Lord. And when God has his people ready for the harvest, that's when we will be reaped. And that's what I want in my life. I truly want to be ready for the harvest. I don't want to make my life something that's just a waste of time. I've given now 25 years to the Lord, and he's given me strength and encouragement and direction, and I want that to be in honor of my Father who has called me through the ministration of his Son. I don't want this to be a waste of time where at the end of my experience I veer off because I'm too proud, or because I'm not willing to follow the truth. I'm not willing to come to the light that my deeds would be exposed. It would be a waste of time, so much ministry. I want to be able to bear the fruit that God has asked me to bear. And it's based on him. I mean, it's really his business. I just need to be willing to be directed by him. Let's bow our heads asking God to continue to use us, continue to bless us, and also to use us to be a blessing for others as well. So let's bow ourselves and ask for God's blessings. Our Father in heaven, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be able to know what it is that you're saying in your word, and help us also to know what you're not saying. Here, Jesus was showing us that those that are supposed to be your people are going to be the ones that we're trying to kill him, but also those at the end of time that are claiming to be your people are going to be the ones that are going to try to take our lives as well. It doesn't seem possible. It seems so contrary to what we've always been taught. But I ask that you would help that our eyes would be opened, and that we would not be taken by surprise by the fulfilling of these types in the life of Christ that will end up being an antitype in our experience. I know that the final, last closing scenes of your Son's life are illustrating the final movements of this earth's history. And so, why not this time as well? We just pray that you'd help us to be ready by your word, by your light, by your shining, by your direction, by the providence of your angels, and how they direct and guide and how you use them. All of those things, I pray, would prepare us for that final harvest, so that you can be glorified and our lives will not have been a waste of time. Thank you so much, and continue to guide and bless us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.